What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. It is week 3 of the fantasy football season, or at least the Sunday slate for week 2 is out of the way. We still got the Monday games, but I figured we need to get these waiver wire pickups out here ready for you guys. Trying to talk about these players that you need to be picking up here in week 3 of the fantasy football season. So that's what we're going to be doing today. This week's waiver wire is a little bit better than week 1. We did have a couple players that snuck through that week 2 waiver wire that are now finding their way here at the top of week 3 as well. So we'll talk about the recurring names, but overall a little bit of a better week. There are some more running backs than in last week. So if you need some help, we got some help for you. But let's hop right into today's video. Let's not waste any more time and let's start talking about these waiver wire pickups. All right, so as we do every week, before we get into the top 10 names at the positions, I do have some players that I would be prioritizing on the waiver wire that are currently over that 50% threshold. We only talk about players really in depth if they are under the 50% threshold, because that means they're going to be available in more than 50% of leagues or in most leagues. So the players that are still worth looking for if you're in your leagues that are above the 50% are Quinshon Judkins, who obviously ended up having a start for the Browns last week, Cam Scadaboo, Juwan Jennings, Keenan Allen, Harold Fannin Jr., who was on last week's waiver episode, Jake Ferguson, Ramondre Stevenson, Trey Benson, Darnell Mooney, and Jonnu Smith. These are the guys' names I would be looking at, but we're not going to talk about them in detail because they are rostered in a majority of leagues. Now that said, let's go to my first overall pickup. It is going to be Bhayshul Tuten. He's my number 1 guy on the waiver wire this week, and he's currently rostered in about 45% of leagues. He was on week 2's stash video, so if you watched our stash video, we did tell you to pick him up before the weekend started. Hopefully you were able to do so, but he went out there this week, 8 carries, 42 rushing yards, 2 receptions for 32 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. The reality is he kind of just took over the 33% backfield carry share that he and Tank Bigsby had been splitting in week 1. It is now officially Tuten's role there behind ETN. So ETN's still the number 1 guy for now, but Tuten is definitely a part of this offense and worth picking up at this point in time because he is going to be involved, especially now that Tank Bigsby is in Philadelphia. Let's move on over to the second guy. This is a repeat offender here for week 2's waiver wire. Cedric Tillman pops up again here on week 3, and that's because he's still sitting at 46% roster percentage. He hasn't crossed that 50% threshold. This week, not as big of a week as week 1. He went 2 receptions on 7 targets for 22 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. It was a batted ball that he ended up catching into the end zone, but overall, the underlying metrics are here. Like I said, a repeat offender, big week last week, decent week this week because of the touchdown, but back-to-back games here with 7+ targets. I think he should remain a valuable pass catcher in this Cleveland Browns offense, and a main part of it for an offense that's going to be throwing the football a lot. So definitely pick up Cedric Tillman if he's still available in your leagues. He should not remain on the waiver wire after this week. Moving on, the number 3 guy that I would be picking up would be Elic Ayomanor for the Tennessee Titans. This is another player that was featured on that stash video, so just like Bhayshul Tuten, we said try and pick this guy up before the weekend. That way you don't have to fight on the waiver wire for him. And now we're going to be talking about him as a waiver wire pickup. 4 for 6, 56 yards, 1 touchdown. Currently rostered in about 28% of leagues. Through 2 games so far this year, he has only seen 1 fewer target than Calvin Ridley. He's seeing a 21.3% target share. And just like Cedric Tillman, should not be left on waivers after this week. So make sure you go get Elic Ayomanor. Let's go on to the number 4 player, and that's going to be Chris Rodriguez for me. Don't have anything for him because he hasn't played in a game so far this year. However, Austin Eckler, unfortunately, tore the Achilles tendon. That means he's done for the year. Chris Rodriguez is going to be the next man up, or at least that's what it looks like right now, assuming that Washington doesn't go out and get a guy in free agency, doesn't go trade for a player. But it's Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt who should see the majority of the workload now, so just in case he's available in your leagues, he shouldn't be, but just in case he is, go look for him. And Jeremy McNichols is probably going to be in some of the receiving game, but Chris Rodriguez is the next man up, only rostered in about 9% of leagues right now. At least worth a look if you're looking for some running back help. Now, Romeo Doubs is also another player that I'm going to be looking at on the waiver wire. Currently rostered in about 23% of leagues. He went 3 for 5 last week for 28 total yards and a touchdown. Not a big game by any means, but he should be more involved moving forward for the Green Bay Packers because Jaden Reed broke his collarbone in that matchup this weekend on Thursday Night Football against the Commanders. So I do think that Romeo Doubs should see an uptick in targets now. He should see more playing time. He should run some more routes. He's a player I'd be looking for because this Green Bay Packers team looks really good, and I just want pieces in the offense, so give me Romeo Doubs if he's available in your leagues. Speaking of a player that snuck through the waiver wire last week. Juwan Johnson currently sitting at 49%, so just barely underneath that 50% threshold. We talked about him on that week 2 waiver wire show. 5 for 9 again this week, 49 total yards and 1 touchdown. This is a bona fide tight end one as long as Spencer Rattler is throwing the football, as long as he's seeing the target share he's seeing, because right now this target tree has been consolidated by the New Orleans Saints. It's really just Chris Olave and Juwan Johnson who are seeing the majority of the workload, and Johnson has seen a 26.5% target share. So I would say he is the number 1 tight end you should be picking up. He's the number 1 tight end that I would be looking at if you're trying to play players off of the waiver wire into your starting tight end slot. And he's another guy that I'm just going to say should not remain on waivers after this week. We've seen 2 weeks now. It does look like this is a trend. Make sure Juwan Johnson is on your rosters. Going to the quarterback, I think Daniel Jones definitely deserves to be picked up. He's a player who was on week 2's waiver wire video as well. The last of the guys that we talked about last week that has snuck through here into week 3, 35% rostership percentage. So it did go up a little bit, but we're still far away from that 50% threshold. Again, just like Juwan Johnson, back-to-back weeks here, 2 straight weeks of top 12 finishes at the quarterback position. And I think if you are a Burrow manager, a Purdy manager, somebody who is dealing with some quarterback injuries and you're looking for some help, it looks like Daniel Jones is clearly going to be fantasy football relevant with this Indianapolis Colts team. And I would be picking him up, and you can play him right away because he's given us those top 12 performances in back-to-back weeks. And this was a good defense against the Denver Broncos that he still went out and performed with. So definitely feel a lot more comfortable with Daniel Jones than I did in week 1. Still thought he was worth picking up. Definitely think he's worth picking up now going into week 3. Now, speaking of Joe Burrow injury, Jake Browning is going to find his way into this waiver wire episode. He's only rostered in about 1% of leagues, and that's because nobody's picking up Jake Browning unless something happens to Joe Burrow. Unfortunately, something did happen to Joe Burrow. He did have that turf toe injury. They're saying it's grade 3, which means he's probably going to require surgery. It does feel like he's going to be out for the next 3 months. That said, that is a long time that we're going to be without Joe Burrow in this offense. Everybody in Cincinnati kind of gets a little bit of a bump down. Jamar Chase still performed with Jake Browning last week, but T. Higgins gets bumped down. I think Chase Brown gets bumped down. Gesicki gets bumped down. Everybody else gets bumped down for the most part. Chase is the only one I think can maybe avoid a bump down, but even then I still think I will probably move him down the rankings just a tiny bit. That said though, Jake Browning is not a bad quarterback. He had multiple quarterback 1 finishes in fantasy football at the quarterback position when filling in for Joe Burrow back in 2023. So I think if you're in a super flex league, you're a Burrow manager looking for quarterback help, and you don't have the Daniel Jones of the world that are available still on your waiver wire, I would go look at Jake Browning, pick him up, see if you can get some plays out of him, because he did fill in nicely for Burrow back in 2023, but the remainder of the offense is a little bit more worrisome now with Browning instead of Burrow. Another running back that I thought is worth picking up here going into week 3 is going to be Blake Corum for the Los Angeles Rams. He's only rostered right now in about 13% of leagues. He had 5 carries for 44 total yards and a touchdown. I think the main reason why I'm picking up Blake Corum is he split carries evenly with Kyren Williams inside of that 20-yard line this week. He went 3-3 with Kyren in those touches, and he was the only running back on this roster to see a carry and a touchdown inside that 5-yard line for the Los Angeles Rams. So that said, I don't think this is a player that we're picking up and playing right away. He is more of a handcuff option to Kyren Williams, but this is going to be something that's annoying, especially if you have Kyren Williams, because Blake Corum, his presence is more so hurting everybody else than it is helping anybody right now in that backfield. You obviously, if you have Kyren Williams, you want him to get the majority of the workload, and you don't want to see him splitting goal line carries or red zone carries or 5-zone carries or any of that stuff that's going to translate to fantasy points. But Corum is the handcuff to pick up in this situation. I think for now, I would be picking him up if I have Kyren Williams. And if I don't have Kyren Williams and I want an upside handcuff for potential injury down the line, Corum's the guy. And last but not least, I am going to say Wan'Dale Robinson is worth picking up. It's not sexy. It's not anything that you really want to do, but he's currently rostered in about 27% of leagues, coming off of a game here where he went 8 for 10 for 142 yards and a touchdown. He's seen 8+ targets in multiple weeks so far this season already. He's going to be a PPR merchant. That's kind of what Wan'Dale Robinson is. However, he's being used just a little bit more downfield this year than I've seen him used in past. But if you're in a moderately deep PPR league, this is certainly a guy that needs to be on rosters. And I'm going to throw out an honorable mention name that's probably going to be talked about in the stash video here later this week. But if Wan'Dale Robinson isn't available, Troy Franklin is somebody that I like as well as a PPR guy. I was between Wan'Dale and Troy for the final 10th spot. I think it could go either way, but PPR leagues, I think Wan'Dale's going to give you a little bit more consistent production for now. All right, folks, so there you have it. That is 10 players that I'm going to be picking up, prioritizing on my waiver wires as we head into week 3 of the fantasy football season. As I said at the beginning of this video, we still have 2 Monday Night Football games to play this evening, so stay updated, stay subscribed to this channel. Make sure if something happens in those leagues to come back and check, because I will have updates here probably in the comment section of this video and obviously on some future videos. So like I said, make sure you're subscribed. If you found something informative, entertaining, or actionable in today's video, make sure you hit the like button and show us some support there. And last but not least, make sure you go join our free Discord. But with all of that being said, I have nothing else for you guys today, so I will see you in our next episode. But until then, peace out.